They were already smiling before the session officially began. That was the first sign something was about to go wrong. The Grand Council chamber was filled to capacity, its curved tiers glowing softly with ceremonial light. Delegates from 100 systems sat upright, robes pristine, crests polished, expressions carefully arranged somewhere between pride and boredom. This was supposed to be routine, a formality, the kind of meeting you attended because history demanded witnesses, not because anything surprising might happen. At the center dais, the speaker adjusted their mantle and cleared their throat. "Esteemed members of the council," they began, voice resonant and practiced. "Today we conclude a matter that has occupied far too much of our collective attention." A ripple of agreement passed through the chamber. I watched from the observer's alcove as the projection activated, a clean, elegant display of figures, charts, and timelines. Everything about it screamed success. "The Human Compliance Initiative," the speaker continued, "has concluded exactly as predicted." A few delegates nodded, others leaned back, satisfied. Humans, after all, were troublesome only in theory. Loud, emotional, imaginative, but when confronted with properly structured law, they always folded. Everyone did. Systems built on regulation were unbeatable because they didn't require force, only patience. The humans were given clear directives, clear boundaries, clear consequences. The display shifted, showing neatly stamped documents and legal filings. "They acknowledged every clause," another official added, standing to assist, "filed every required response, submitted every form, requested clarification where appropriate." That drew a few chuckles. I remember thinking briefly that the humans sounded unusually thorough. "But the outcome is what matters," the speaker said, lifting a hand for silence. "And the outcome is compliance." The word hung in the air like a reward. Applause began, polite at first, then louder. Several counselors stood, already preparing remarks congratulating one another on an elegantly done job. It was then that a junior archivist raised a hand, hesitantly. The speaker paused, irritation flickering briefly across their features. "Yes?" "There is a supplementary report from the human delegation." A sigh rippled through the chamber. "Is it necessary?" the speaker asked. "It was submitted on time, and it references prior cases." That gave me pause. The speaker waved dismissively. "Very well, summarize." The archivist swallowed and activated a secondary display. This one was less polished, dense, text-heavy, uncomfortably thorough. "The humans," the archivist said slowly, "have complied with every regulation as written." "Yes," the speaker said, "we've established that." "But," the archivist continued, "they have also invoked subsection amendments, exemptions, and legacy precedents." The applause faded. A counselor leaned forward. "Legacy precedents?" "Yes," the archivist said, "some dating back several centuries, many established during first contact eras." "That's irrelevant," someone snapped. "Those laws were never meant to be—" "Humans," the archivist said quietly, "appear to disagree." Silence crept into the chamber, unwelcome and heavy. "They have not refused," the archivist continued. "They have not protested. They have not violated a single statute." "So what's the problem?" the speaker asked sharply. The archivist hesitated. "The problem," they said, "is that according to their filings, the initiative worked perfectly." A pause. "And?" the speaker demanded. "And," the archivist finished, "the humans are now legally entitled to outcomes none of us anticipated." I felt it then, that subtle shift in the room. Not panic, not yet, but confusion, the kind that comes right before realization. Somewhere in the chamber, someone muttered, "That's not how this was supposed to go." And for the first time since the humans had entered galactic law, the council stopped expecting applause and began, very slowly, to listen. The council expected outrage. That was the second mistake. After the archivist finished speaking, a dozen responses were prepared in advance. Formal reprimands, procedural clarifications, even a contingency statement meant to soothe diplomatic bruises. The humans were supposed to protest, to argue, to appeal emotionally once they realized how boxed in they were. They did none of that. Instead, the human delegation submitted footnotes. Actual footnotes. I remember the speaker staring at the update feed in silence as the data scrolled past. Not demands, not threats, just calm, methodical references. Clarification request, the speaker read aloud, disbelief edging into their voice. Filed respectfully. Another counselor leaned over. What does it say? The speaker hesitated, then read. We thank the Council for its guidance. In accordance with Statute 14.3, Appendix C, subsection 7, we are proceeding as allowed. Allowed. That word did more damage than any insult could have. A legal aide stepped forward, clearly flustered. They're asking if the Council would prefer the standard interpretation or the historical interpretation of the clause. Murmurs spread. There is no historical interpretation, someone snapped. There is, the aide replied. We just don't use it anymore. The display shifted again, this time showing archival timestamps, old treaties, early contact resolutions, provisional laws written in haste centuries ago. Laws no one expected to matter again. Except the humans had read them. All of them. They aren't defying us, another counselor said slowly. They're cooperating. Yes, I said quietly from the observer's alcove. That's what makes this worse. The human response continued to unfold line by line. Where a species might normally challenge authority, humans requested clarification. Where others would threaten withdrawal, humans asked for confirmation. Every message ended politely. Gratefully, even. One counselor slammed a clawed hand against the desk. Why aren't they upset? The legal aide didn't look up. Because they appear to be satisfied. Satisfied. That word landed poorly. They were supposed to feel constrained, the speaker said. That was the entire point of the initiative. And they do, the aide replied, just not in the way we intended. Another update arrived. This one included a projected timeline, human-authored, detailing exactly how they planned to proceed under the Council's own regulations. It was efficient. It was compliant. It was devastating. They've accelerated their implementation, the aide said, using the exemptions we granted them to appear generous. Someone laughed nervously. That's not possible. It is, the aide replied. They thanked us for them. The chamber grew restless. Delegates shifted in their seats, no longer relaxed, no longer amused. What happens if we deny their interpretation? A counselor asked. The aide paused. Then we contradict our own precedents. And if we revise the law? Then we admit the system can be bent when we are uncomfortable. Silence followed. I watched realization begin to spread, not fear yet, but something more fragile. Embarrassment. The humans hadn't challenged authority. They had accepted it, completely, perfectly. And in doing so, they revealed something the Council had never considered. The system was designed to control those who resisted it, not those who embraced it. As the human delegation's final note appeared on the display, one line stood out, simple, and unassuming. Please advise if further compliance is required. The speaker stared at it for a long time, then very quietly asked the question no one else wanted to voice. When, they said, did compliance become a threat? No one answered, but everyone understood. Humans, once again, had not reacted correctly, and the council was beginning to suspect that was the most dangerous reaction of all. The third mistake was assuming this was new. It wasn't. The realization came quietly, the way truly dangerous truths often do, slipping into the room disguised as a routine cross-check. One of the archivists, clearly trying to be helpful, flagged an anomaly in the human filings. There's a pattern, they said. The speaker didn't look up. Define pattern. The archivist swallowed. This isn't the first time humans have complied like this. That earned attention. A senior counselor leaned forward. They've resisted before. Yes, the archivist replied. They've protested, they've negotiated, they've even withdrawn. But this particular style of compliance has appeared before. The display changed again. Older now, grainier. Records pulled from deep archive layers most delegates had never bothered to open. First contact eras, transitional councils, provisional charters written in a hurry back when the galaxy was still figuring out how to talk to new species without starting wars. Here, the archivist said, highlighting an entry. A trade dispute. Humans complied fully. Result, the trade bloc collapsed within a decade. Murmurs. Another entry appeared. Here, a migration restriction. Humans followed every clause. Result, 3 neutral systems reclassified themselves to qualify under an exception. The room grew colder. And here, the archivist continued, voice tightening, a military limitation treaty. Humans accepted all terms. Someone scoffed. And, the archivist said, they redefined military using our own glossary. Silence. The speaker finally looked up. You're telling me this has happened before? Yes, the archivist said. Repeatedly. A counselor shifted uncomfortably. Why wasn't this flagged? The archivist hesitated. Because each incident was technically successful. No laws were broken, no complaints were filed, no crises were declared. Then why do none of those systems look the same afterward? Another counselor asked. No one answered. I watched the council do something rare. They stopped talking and started reading. Lines scrolled past, human annotations, polite clarifications, footnotes referencing obscure addendums written by long-dead lawmakers who never imagined humans would take them seriously. They treat the law like a machine, someone whispered. No, I said quietly, unable to stop myself. They treat it like a promise. That drew a few glances, but no one contradicted me. The archivist brought up the most recent comparison, nearly identical in tone to the current situation. The human response back then ended with a single line. We are grateful for the clarity. The room felt smaller after that. They learn, the speaker said slowly. They catalog outcomes. Yes, the archivist agreed, and they adjust. A counselor's voice cracked slightly. Why didn't we notice? The archivist didn't sugarcoat it. Because the consequences weren't immediate. They never are. I felt the unease settle in fully then, heavy and inescapable. Humans didn't rebel against systems. They studied them. They didn't tear structures down. They leaned on them, patiently, politely, until the strain revealed every weakness. The council had expected defiance. They had prepared for outrage. What they were facing instead was precedent. And precedent, once invoked, had a way of spreading. As the display faded, the speaker spoke again, more subdued now. "So this isn't a response?" "No," the archivist replied. "It's a method." And somewhere deep in the council's collective memory, an old, uncomfortable thought resurfaced. Humans didn't need to threaten the galaxy. They only needed time. And the galaxy, it seemed, had already given them plenty. By the time the council reached this stage, no one was pretending anymore. The screens were filled with statutes now, dense, layered, and uncomfortably familiar. Laws written by committees that no longer existed. Clauses approved unanimously because no one thought they mattered. Footnotes added to clarify intent and then quietly forgotten. Every one of them was highlighted. Every one of them was cited. By humans. They didn't exploit loopholes, the legal aid said, voice flat. They didn't even bend anything. The speaker's mandibles twitched. Then explain how this happened. The aide gestured helplessly at the display. They followed the law, exactly. That, somehow, was worse. The council had always believed the law was a net, wide enough to catch anyone who resisted, tight enough to restrict anyone who complied too slowly. It was elegant, predictable, safe. Humans had walked straight into it, and then calmly pointed out how it was woven. They submitted every form on time, used the approved templates, addressed the correct authorities, logged their acknowledgments in triplicate. A counselor leaned forward. And the exceptions? Requested, approved, documented. Another voice, quieter now. The exceptions were meant to be symbolic. Yes, the aide said, the humans treated them as operational. A silence settled over the chamber. One of the elder counselors finally spoke. Show me where they broke protocol. The aide zoomed in on a highlighted section. This clause, they said, it allows for alternative compliance methods in cases of cultural variance. The elder nodded. That's standard. Yes, the aide replied. Humans provided cultural documentation, extensive documentation. The next screen appeared. Human submissions describing legal philosophy, historical precedent, and social norms. Not emotional appeals, not moral arguments, just definitions. They didn't argue that the law was unfair. They argued that it was clear. The speaker stared at the words for a long time. They thanked us, someone muttered. They always do, the aide replied. Another counselor's voice rose, sharp with frustration. This was never meant to empower them. No, I said quietly from the observer's alcove. It was meant to constrain them. All eyes turned towards me. And it did, I continued, just not in the direction you expected. The humans hadn't resisted authority. They had accepted responsibility under it. They had taken every allowance at face value, every protection seriously, every obligation as binding. Where others negotiated spirit, humans insisted on letter. And the letter, it turned out, was far more dangerous. One final document appeared on the screen, the human summary. It was short, polite, meticulous. We confirm our full compliance with council law. Please advise if additional adherence is required. The speaker exhaled slowly. If we deny this, they said, we admit the law is selective. And if we accept it, another asked, then we accept the outcome. No one liked that answer. Because the outcome wasn't domination. It wasn't rebellion. It was something far more unsettling. The law had worked perfectly. And in doing so, It had handed humans exactly what they needed. Not power, legitimacy. The Council had built a system to rule the galaxy. Humans had simply read the instructions and followed them. The room changed before anyone said it out loud. Not dramatically, not all at once, just subtly. Conversation slowed. Gestures stopped mid-motion. A few counselors leaned back in their seats, not in confidence anymore, but distance, as if stepping away from something they just noticed was unstable. The speaker was still staring at the human summary. "It doesn't say what they want," they said finally. The legal aid hesitated. "Because they already have it." That landed harder than any accusation. A counselor scoffed weakly. "That's impossible. We haven't granted them anything new." "No," the aide replied. "You granted them everything years ago. You just didn't expect anyone to use it." The display shifted again. This time, projections layered over one another. Permissions, exceptions, historical allowances. Individually harmless, collectively alarming. "They're combining clauses," the aide continued. "Not illegally, sequentially." "Like stacking blocks," someone murmured. "Yes," the aide said, "exactly like that." The speaker's voice was quieter now. "And the result?" "The result," the aide said carefully, "is that the humans are operating entirely within Council authority while no longer being constrained by its intent." Silence followed. A senior counselor broke it. "Intent matters." "It does," the aide agreed, "unless it's not written down." That was when the realization began to spread. Not panic yet, but something colder. Understanding. "They didn't ask for permission," another counselor said slowly. "They asked for clarification." "Yes." "And we gave it." "Yes." "And now," the counselor finished, "they're acting as if the answer was binding." The aide nodded. "Because it was." I watched several delegates glance toward the observer's alcove, not at me specifically, but at the idea of being watched, of this moment being recorded. One of them whispered, "Can we reverse it?" The speaker didn't answer immediately. When they did, their voice lacked certainty. "Reversal implies error." And error implies vulnerability." No one argued. A different counselor leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "If humans are doing this now, how long have they been preparing?" The aide brought up a timestamp. "Decades." Another followed. "Generations." The chamber felt smaller again. "They didn't rush," the speaker said. "They waited." "Yes," the aide replied. "They always do." The human strategy, if it could be called that, wasn't aggressive. It wasn't urgent. It didn't even look like strategy at first glance. It looked like patience. They hadn't pushed the system. They had trusted it enough to let it reveal itself. A counselor finally voiced the thought everyone was avoiding. "What happens when others notice?" The aide didn't hesitate. "They already have." A new notification appeared. Requests from neutral systems, trade coalitions, minor species asking for copies of the human filings. For reference, for understanding, for precedent. The speaker closed his eyes briefly. "This isn't a crisis," he said, more to himself than the room. "No," I said softly. "It's a demonstration." The council expected defiance. They had prepared to suppress rebellion. What they were facing instead was comprehension. And comprehension, once shared, had a way of spreading faster than fear. The humans hadn't changed the rules. They had shown everyone how the rules actually worked. And that's when the council realized the most dangerous phase hadn't begun with protest or violence. It had begun the moment the humans said, "We understand." The question was asked softly, almost casually, which was how the council preferred its panic: quiet, contained, deniable. The legal aid had been scrolling for several minutes without speaking, their expression tightening with each line. Finally, one of the counselors leaned forward and asked a thing everyone was thinking. "That's not illegal, is it?" The aide stopped scrolling. "No," they said, "it isn't." A few delegates exhaled. One even laughed, short, relieved. "Then we're fine," someone said. "We'll issue a clarification, tighten the language, close the gap." The aide looked up. "There is no gap." Silence returned, sharper this time. "They didn't slip through anything," the aide continued. "They are standing exactly where the law places them." The speaker frowned. "Show me." The display shifted again, this time to a single clause, highlighted in pale blue. "This provision," the aide said, "was written to protect smaller species from administrative overreach." "Yes," the speaker said, "I remember approving it. It guarantees autonomy under compliance, so long as all conditions are met." "And they are?" "Every single one." A pause. "And this one?" another counselor asked, pointing. "That prevents retroactive penalties." "And this?" "That forbids selective enforcement." The room grew uncomfortably still. One counselor's voice dropped. "So if we intervene now, we violate our own framework," the aide finished. The speaker's mandibles clicked once. "What if we claim misinterpretation?" The aide shook her head. "The humans documented every clarification we gave them, including timestamps, including authorizations." Someone muttered, "Of course they did." A junior counselor, clearly struggling, asked, "Then what can we do?" The aide hesitated. "We can acknowledge compliance," they said, "or we can admit the law only applies when convenient." Neither option was appealing. Another counselor leaned back slowly. "This feels intentional." The aide nodded. "It is." I watched the realization finally harden into something unmistakable. The humans hadn't rushed this. They hadn't gambled. They had waited until the council itself confirmed every step. One of the elders spoke, voice heavy. "They didn't break the law because they didn't need to." "No," I said quietly. "They trusted it." That earned a few uneasy glances. "Trust is not a weapon," someone snapped. "No," I replied, "but predictability is." The aide brought up the final summary again, the same polite document, unchanged. "Please advise if further compliance is required." It didn't read like a threat. It read like an invitation. And that was the most unsettling part. The council had spent centuries mastering control through complexity, believing that no one would ever read far enough, care long enough, or comply thoroughly enough to expose the system's assumptions. Humans had done all three. Someone finally said it out loud, voice barely above a whisper. "They're daring us." "No," the aide replied. "They're trusting us to be consistent." The speaker closed his eyes. Consistency had always been the council's greatest strength, and now, faced with humans who treated it as absolute rather than flexible, it had become a liability. The question echoed again in the chamber, no longer casual, no longer theoretical. "That's not illegal, is it?" And for the first time in council history, the answer offered no comfort at all. By now, no one was pretending this was accidental. The council chamber had gone quiet in a way that had nothing to do with decorum. No murmurs, no side conversations, just the soft hum of systems running calculations no one trusted anymore. The speaker finally broke the silence. "Explain," they said, "not the law, the behavior." The legal aide hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Humans never framed this as resistance." A counselor scoffed. "Of course they did. This is resistance." "No, it's cooperation." That word sat badly in the room. "They never raised their voices," the aide continued. "They never accused us of injustice. They never claimed mistreatment. Every communication was respectful, grateful even." The display shifted again. Message logs, neatly formatted, tagged, and indexed. "Thank you for the clarification. We appreciate the Council's guidance. Please let us know if we have misunderstood." A counselor stared at the phrases, unsettled. "They sound sincere." "They are," the aide said. "That's the problem." Politeness, in the Council's experience, was ornamental, a ritual, a layer of civility applied to soften power. Humans treated it differently. They treated it as binding. "They assumed we meant what we said," the aide continued. "Every courtesy, every reassurance, every of course and certainly." The speaker's eyes narrowed. "That's not how diplomacy works." "No, that's how promises work." Several heads turned toward me again, but no one interrupted. When humans say something politely, they expect it to hold. The aide nodded. "They thanked us for our flexibility, then used it." "They apologized for the inconvenience," another counselor muttered. "Yes, and then proceeded anyway." The council had always relied on ambiguity, soft language that allowed authority to adjust without admitting error. Humans had removed that flexibility simply by taking every word seriously. "They didn't argue with intent," the aide said. "They accepted it, publicly." A pause. "And by doing so," the speaker said slowly, "they made deviation impossible." "Yes." The realization spread, heavy and unavoidable. Humans hadn't turned aggression into a weapon. They had turned good faith into one. One counselor leaned forward, voice tight. "So what happens now?" The aide gestured to the incoming requests, other species asking for guidance, for copies of human filings, for clarification on their own rights. "Now," the aide said, "the same politeness will be expected of us." The speaker closed his eyes. The council had built its authority on the assumption that no one would ever treat its words as absolute, that flexibility was a privilege of power. Humans had removed that privilege by trusting it completely. "They didn't embarrass us," the speaker said quietly. "No, they respected you." That somehow was worse, because respect made retaliation look like betrayal. As the chamber fell silent again, one truth settled in with uncomfortable clarity. Humans didn't need to shout to be heard. They didn't need threats to apply pressure. They only needed to believe, openly, earnestly, that the council meant exactly what it said. And once that belief was on record, politeness stopped being harmless. It became irreversible. The first proposal to fix the situation was delivered carefully. Too carefully. A mid-tier counselor suggested it during a lull, voice neutral, posture composed, exactly the way one floated an idea meant to sound harmless. "We could amend the language," they said, "clarify intent, close certain interpretations." No one responded immediately, because everyone understood what that really meant. The legal aide was the first to speak. "Retroactively?" The counselor hesitated. "Ideally, no." "Then it wouldn't apply," the aide replied. "And if we do it retroactively?" another counselor asked. The aide didn't look up. "Then we admit the law only matters until it becomes inconvenient." The room went still. The council had survived for centuries by projecting inevitability. The laws were not choices. They were facts, immovable, impartial, unquestionable. Changing them now wouldn't just affect humans. It would affect everyone. A senior delegate leaned back slowly. If we alter the statutes, every species that ever lost a dispute will ask why their compliance wasn't worth reconsidering. And they'd be right, the aide said. The speaker tapped the dais once, sharply. What if we isolate this case? The aide shook her head. The humans published everything. A pause. Published? Someone echoed. Yes, the aide said. Open archives, public access, annotated. Of course they had. The humans hadn't treated the council's decisions as private leverage. They'd treated them as shared truth. Any revision now, the aide continued, would be visible, documented, interpreted. And weaponized, someone muttered. I watched the realization settle fully this time. Not confusion, not embarrassment, but recognition. The system could not be patched quietly. Any change would be an admission that the rules were not universal, that authority bent under pressure, that fear, not fairness, decided outcomes. The speaker exhaled slowly. If we do nothing. The aide looked up. Then the humans proceed. And if others follow, they already are. A new request blinked onto the display, another species citing the same clauses, then another, then another. Not rebellions, applications. The council had always feared defiance. What it was facing now was participation. They're not tearing the system down, a counselor said softly. They're using it. Yes, I replied, and making everyone else realize they can too. Silence filled the chamber again, thick and unavoidable. The council had built a system designed to be obeyed, not examined. Humans had examined it. And now fixing it would mean breaking the illusion that it had ever been fair by default. The speaker finally spoke, voice heavy. We can't change the rules, they said. No one argued, because everyone understood what that meant. The humans had done the one thing no empire could defend against. They had forced the council to choose between authority and consistency. And the council had just admitted, without saying it out loud, that consistency mattered more. Which meant the humans would be allowed to continue, not because they were feared, but because stopping them would expose something far worse. It happened without ceremony. No alarms, no raised voices, no dramatic accusation. Just a sentence. The legal aid had been quiet for some time, scrolling through the latest incoming requests, not from humans this time, but from everywhere else. Trade unions, minor coalitions, independent systems that had never spoken in this chamber before, all citing the same thing, human precedent. The aide finally cleared their throat. There is one more development. The speaker didn't respond right away. Neither did anyone else. By now, every new development carried weight. Proceed, the speaker said. The aide adjusted the display. A single document appeared, shorter than the rest. Not a statute, not a treaty, a request. This was submitted an hour ago by a collective of 6 non-aligned species. And, a counselor asked, they are requesting to be reclassified under the same compliance framework the humans used. The room went still. They qualify? Another asked. Yes. Legally? Yes. The speaker's mandibles clicked once. And if approved, then they gain the same protections, the same operational autonomy, the same exemptions. Silence thickened. Someone finally said it, quietly, almost reverently. So, this spreads. The aide nodded. It already has. Another counselor leaned forward, voice low. What if we deny the request? The aide didn't hesitate. Then we admit the framework only applies to humans. And that would mean that compliance is rewarded selectively. A long pause followed. The speaker looked out over the chamber at faces that were once confident, now calculating, not out of ambition, out of fear. Because this was the moment power structures feared most. Not rebellion, not invasion, imitation. The council had spent centuries ensuring no one looked too closely at the system. As long as outcomes were predictable, the machinery itself could remain unquestioned. Humans had questioned it politely, and now others were doing the same. One of the elder counselors spoke, voice brittle. "We always assumed obedience meant control." "Yes," I said quietly from the alcove. "You never considered what would happen if obedience meant understanding." No one contradicted me. The aide scrolled further. "There are more requests queued, similar language, similar citations." "How many?" the speaker asked. The aide hesitated. "Enough that denial would draw attention." Attention, the one thing the council could not afford. Because once the galaxy started watching how laws were applied instead of who they favored, the illusion of effortless authority would collapse. The speaker said nothing for a long time. Then, slowly, they deactivated the display. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was absolute. The kind of silence that arrives when everyone in the room understands the same thing at once and knows there's no language for it yet. The council had not lost power in a vote. It had not been overthrown. It had not been challenged. It had been comprehended. And comprehension, once shared, could not be unlearned. The speaker finally spoke, voice low and careful. "Approve the request." No one objected, because by then, everyone understood. This wasn't about humans anymore. It was about what happened when one species proved that the system worked exactly as written, and everyone else realized they could read too. The council fell silent not because it had nothing to say, but because for the first time, it no longer controlled the meaning of its own words. The council adjourned without fanfare. That alone was unprecedented. No closing statements, no reaffirmations of authority, just a procedural dismissal issued quietly, as if everyone involved hoped the moment might pass unnoticed if they didn't acknowledge it too loudly. It didn't. The chamber emptied slowly. Delegates left in small groups, voices hushed, expressions tight. No one lingered to celebrate. No one hurried to spin the outcome. There was nothing to spin. The humans had not demanded anything. That was the final insult. Days later, after the requests had been approved, after the precedents had been logged, after the system had absorbed the change like a fault line settling, another message arrived from the human delegation. Not a demand, not a reminder, a courtesy. The speaker read it alone this time. "We appreciate the Council's continued cooperation," it began. "We are pleased that the framework functioned as intended." Functioned as intended. The speaker closed their eyes briefly. There was a postscript. "Please inform us if any further clarification is required." No sarcasm. No triumph. Just consistency. I was asked later to summarize the incident for archival purposes, to explain in neutral terms why a single compliant species had managed to destabilize centuries of assumed authority without firing a shot or raising a voice. I struggled with that. Because what frightened the galaxy wasn't what the humans did, it was what they didn't do. They didn't threaten withdrawal. They didn't leverage military force. They didn't expose corruption or accuse bad faith. They trusted the system completely. And in doing so, they revealed something the council had worked very hard to obscure. The laws were never designed to be read by everyone, only enforced. Humans had read them anyway, carefully, patiently, together. They had treated politeness as literal, compliance as binding, authority as accountable. And once that behavior was visible, once it was documented, cited, shared, it couldn't be undone. The galaxy adjusted slowly at first. Species began asking questions they'd never dared to ask before, not because they wanted power, but because they wanted clarity. The council still existed, the laws still stood, but something essential had changed. Fear no longer traveled one way. I filed my final note under cultural anomalies, though it didn't quite fit. It read, "Humans are not dangerous because they resist control. They are dangerous because they accept it, and then insist it applies equally." Much later, long after the immediate consequences had settled, I received a private message from a junior human attaché. It contained no legal references, no annotations, just a single line. Every joke needs a good punchline. I understood then. The council thought it was telling a joke, a system designed to sound fair while functioning selectively. Humans listened and waited, and when the timing was perfect, they delivered the punchline. Politely,